Joining me now with their insights on all of this, criminal trial attorney and News Nation legal analyst Sara Azari. She also has a weekly podcast called The Presumption. And Dave Ehrenberg, state attorney for Palm Beach County and a former assistant attorney general. We've got a great panel tonight, Sara and Dave. I want to start with you, Sara. I mean, out driving. They say that he was out driving around. I mean, what do you make of it? I guess I was just expecting something more than that.
Well, I'm sorry you're disappointed, Bryan, but look, Ann Taylor's all business. She's no games here. And I think we're used to seeing an alibi in the traditional sense where it is, I was here at this time and these are the people that can corroborate it. That's not what she's doing. What stood out to me is that there is this new information, and we know that she's saying he was alone. Translation: there is nobody that corroborates, where he was, what he was doing at this time, and that she was driving around. That's key, because should those cell pings, the movement of the car, the data from the phone, in fact check out and be reliable forensic evidence, then he doesn't have to deny that it was him driving that Elantra. He could just say, that still is insufficient to place me in this party house and put a knife in my hand. So I think those two terms were really significant in terms of the new information. And again, I think, alibi under Idaho code doesn't necessarily have to be, I was there, I was with this person at this time. Because remember, in this case, the time stamps go far beyond the 15-minute window around the murder. So for him to be able to get a gazillion terabytes of information and go through all of this with the delay and then be able to say where he was exactly at a specific time is impossible at this. And they're pressing Ann Taylor saying, where's the alibi? Where's the alibi? Where's this? She's like, here's fine. This is what he was doing. He was driving, and that's as much as we can tell you at this point.
Okay, so he was driving around, they say. We know there were cell phone pings, which I guess could go along with this driving around alibi. But Dave, my question is, remember, they said that his phone was turned off during the time of the murders. So if they're going to say he was driving around, how do they then explain why the phone was mysteriously turned off just at the time when the murders happened?
Yeah, such a criminology expert this defendant is, huh? He turns off his phone during the murders and expects to get away with it because of it. How will they find me? My phone was turned off. Well, the stuff in Ann Taylor's document, her pleading, is not inconsistent with what happened. This is what she said, as you quoted, that he would go on drives at night, and he did so late on November 12th and into November 13th. Well, that is still consistent with slaughtering those innocent victims. He could have been driving late on November 12th, stopped at the house in the wee hours, and then drove back. So it's not inconsistent. But the whole purpose of this alibi requirement under Idaho law is to avoid trial by ambush. You want to give prosecutors a chance to track down the witnesses so that Kohberger doesn't show up the day of trial and says, here it is, here's Uncle Stewie, I was at his house with him. That's not fair. And they didn't give any witnesses because there are no witnesses. He's just going to say he was by himself that night. How convenient.
Sara, I remember you told me early on, I remember you said this. You said this on the show, that you thought the biggest issue for the defense was that the phone was turned off. You found that that was a problem. It still doesn't seem like they can explain that. They can say he was driving around, but how do you look past the fact that the phone was turned off?
I thought you were going to cross-examine me. Yeah, I still stand by what I said. I think that's always the bad fact. When a phone is on consistently and then is suddenly off, that to me is far worse than some of the stuff we hear about the touch DNA, for example, at the scene. I think we need to know a lot more about the cell data. Again, to be able to put this into context. I think prosecutors always, Dave may be the exception, but prosecutors always come with hand-picked, cherry-picked pieces of evidence and information, and we then come in with a bigger context. And so without really seeing what the cell data is like, I can't really say how bad it is that his phone was off,
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, we're not getting the full picture, obviously. Dave, there was a line I highlighted in this new document. Mr. Kohberger has indicated he anticipates corroborating witnesses. So they're not telling us who the witnesses are. What do you think that means, Dave? I mean, is there going to be some surprise witness who says, I saw him driving around and he wasn't at the house?
I think that the defense lawyer wants to have it both ways. They're required to provide the names and addresses of the witnesses, and instead they have none. But they're leaving the door open, saying, well, there could be some if we find some, if someone wants to come forward and say that they were with my client. So they want to have it both ways, but they're violating the rule by not providing the names and addresses. Now, here's the thing that I think Sarah and I can agree on, is that even if they violated the rule and didn't provide the names and addresses as required, the judge is still going to allow a last-minute alibi witness in the interest of justice. The tie always goes to the defendant and then some.
Interesting. Yeah.
I also think at one point, I also think the way that I read it was that what Ann Taylor's saying is that had you given us the opportunity to prelim to cross-examine your witnesses, we could potentially corroborate that he was driving around. I read it to mean not necessarily that the defense will bring in new witnesses, but that in the process of the trial and cross-examination, they might be able to corroborate this quote-unquote alibi.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Sarah. You could tell that the defense was annoyed that they didn't get the preliminary hearing. I mean, they thought they were going to get the prelim. There was a secret grand jury happening that no one knew about. I want to read this part that you referred to, Sarah. It says, corroboration of Bryan Kohberger not being at 1122 King may be brought out through cross-examination of the state's witnesses. At this time, Mr. Kohberger cannot be more specific about the possible witnesses and exactly what they will say. Had the state moved forward with the preliminary hearing, the defense would have had the opportunity to develop testimony through cross-examination and witness presentation. So, I mean, I get that they're annoyed, Sarah, but I mean, that's not the way the law works, right? I mean, the prosecution had an opportunity to the grand jury, and that's what they did. So, like, why even say that in the document?
Yeah, and that part of her pleading was a little bit like, wah, wah.
Yeah, wah, wah, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Dave knows this. It's absolutely the state's choice whether to go by grand jury to establish probable cause or do a preliminary hearing, and they chose to go by grand jury. And I always said, why aren't they doing that? When are they going to do that? You know, so it was absolutely their choice. But I think the defense is annoyed altogether that you are delaying discovery, you are trying to take a peek into essentially our work product to find out who was corroborating witnesses are for alibi, and you're trying to violate his sacrosanct right to a speedy trial that he doesn't want to waive. And so sit this one out, you know, prosecutor. And that's really what she's saying. She's kind of like, fine, he was driving around, leave us alone.
Yeah,
that's how
when you mentioned the wah-wah attitude, I mean, with a lot of her filings, I don't know if this is just because there's a gag order, but it's almost like she tries to sort of like paint a picture of the vibe right now, or what she's annoyed about, or what she wants people to know. Do you know what I mean? Have you gotten that sense, Dave, a little bit? Like, or is that just, does this all look normal to you?
Oh, she's mad at the prosecutors because they gave her false hope. For a while, the prosecutors were going to go through with the preliminary hearing, and Sarah and I were like, why? And then, as if they were waiting for her to reach for that dollar bill on the ground, they snatched it away at the last minute. And I think that's what she's upset about, was because the prosecutors always had this ability just to go to a secret grand jury, but they were not going to do so until late after she had prepared for the preliminary hearing. So she's going to try to make life a little miserable for the state now. Yeah,
I guess that would be annoying if you prepared for that preliminary hearing and then you find out that that was kind of a waste of time. Sarah, do you think that he was driving around, this new alibi that's come out, he was driving around? Is that it? I mean, is there going to be more to this when we see a trial, or is this what we should expect? Like, this is what they're going to say, he was just out for this night drive?
I mean, look, it's really nice to be able to stick to a theory of the defense all the way from the beginning through trial. What's important is that at trial, you need to pick a theory and stick to it. But up until trial, it's, you know, you can throw things at the wall and see what sticks. You might say things because you're under pressure like she is to just, you know, get them to back off a little bit. I don't think it's wise because we're all, you know, all eyes are on this case and we're trying to read into every document that is posted on the court's website. And now she's saying he was driving. But look, It's possible, I think these two college towns, there was a definite relationship, egress, ingress, between these, these towns. He lived in that town. And so these college students were socializing back and forth. I don't think it's unusual that he was driving around. It's not like he just decided he can't sleep and started driving around. We don't know where he was driving from, where he was going.
Right.
It's very vague, right? So she's leaving room to be able to explain this further and flesh it out further. That's how I read it.
Dave, if you were the prosecutor on this case, I mean, is there anything that would have you worried at this point? Is there anything that stands out to you where you'd be saying, and again, there's a lot we don't know, but from just what we know, where you'd be telling your team, look, I think we've got an issue with this?
No, there was the one witness inside the home, a surviving roommate who supposedly had exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that could lend towards Kohberger's innocence. And that's why they wanted her to testify at the preliminary hearing. And she didn't want to testify for various reasons. I think that was a fabrication in the press. I don't think she really has that kind of evidence that would clear Kohberger. But that's the only thing I've seen so far, that if it did exist, that could create reasonable doubt. Otherwise, I think that they got this guy dead to rights.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Dave, what about the 3 unknown male DNA profiles at the scene? What about the fact that it was a party house? What about the fact that 8 hours later the police were called and the house was clean? What about the fact that there was...
Well, you say it was a party house. Wouldn't that explain all the DNA, though? There's probably all sorts of DNA profiles there. His DNA was on the knife sheath.
But that's touch DNA. So that's problematic. Dave knows that. And then there was the one-legged situation with the one latent footprint. I mean, what is that? Like, was somebody hopping around? I mean, I see a lot of problems, but those problems can be a wash as we learn more in this case. If there's more evidence that's reliable, that will withstand the testing in court, then I think, we can have a better conversation. But right now I see a lot of problems. I see a lot of holes.
Well, I think it's a good point you make that we don't have a lot of the information. So it's hard. You can only discuss this so far without knowing everything that they know. Sara Azari, Dave Ehrenberg, you both are the greatest. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
This was fun. Thank you.